UK inflation has hit its highest level in 10 months. The rate jumped to 3% in January, up from 2.5% in December. It's more than the experts predicted, and it's caused in part by a rise in the cost of food. It's also, of course, a step in the wrong direction for the government and its 2% target, throwing any further interest rate cuts into some doubt. The government says that getting inflation down will be a bumpy road. Our political correspondent, Shihab Khan, has been crunching the numbers.
While the economic news hasn't been particularly great lately, Best Western hotels have been trying to carry on as usual. The only problem is 60% of the 200 hotels they represent say they've seen costs go up in the last year.
Having been in the business for 30-odd years, this is now the longest sustained, most difficult period of business I've known. We've worked over the last few years to mitigate what we've done. But because it's been going on for a few years now, there seems very little movement now and ability to mitigate any further. So I'm afraid we are going to be passing a lot of these costs on to the customers.
The headline stat is that inflation has gone up to 3%, which is above the 2% target. And that has been driven by, among other things, increases in food prices, which went up by 3.3% compared to this time last year. Then there's been an increase in transport costs, rising by 1.7% in the last 12 months. And then there's the introduction of VAT on private schools, which meant their prices rose by nearly 13% compared to a year ago.
The Bank of England's been clear that they expected inflation to be slightly higher in the first half of this year, while still being on target to go down towards its 2% target rate. So we know that the road is going to be bumpy towards getting to that target. The Bank of England has been clear about that, but we're confident in our plan for change.
It will take time, they say, but right now the economy is essentially not growing, and coupled with rising inflation, it's the worst of all worlds. There are worries too that inflation could rise further.
Moving forward, we're expecting inflation to increase over the coming months, and a lot of that will be driven by rising energy prices, which is concerning as low-income households spend a higher proportion of their income on essentials such as energy.
There was speculation about whether there would be another reduction, but experts say this news casts doubt over that.
I think it does mean fewer interest rate cuts. It's not 1 month's figures that matter, it's the underlying movement, and the underlying movement that we've been seeing isn't good news.
But some argue an interest rate cut is needed to help get the economy pumping, so what the Bank of England will do remains uncertain. What we do know is that the government will want to get inflation back down to its target level as soon as possible. Shihab Khan, ITV News, Westminster.
Well, our political reporter Jasmine Cameron-Cheleshi is at Westminster. Jasmine, where does this leave the government's economic policy?
So these figures will be a real blow to the government and, of course, come as Treasury officials have spent the past few months fielding criticism from the Conservatives, from some within the business community about the impact of last year's budget. Some businesses have warned that they may be putting in place hiring freezes or increasing prices in light of the national insurance hike that will come in April. Now, as we heard, ministers say it's going to be a bit of a bumpy road to get to that 2% inflation target, but they say they're confident in their economic plan aimed at boosting economic growth, and they've announced a handful of proposals in the past few months with that goal in mind. For example, they're giving their backing to a third runway in Heathrow. And they've also made clear that they are clear publicly and privately that they're not changing direction or changing their economic policy. But the challenge is that all of these are longer-term goals, and of course, ultimately, voters will be judging them on how long it takes for them to feel better off.
And what do the figures mean for interest rates?
So the base rate is currently at 4.5%. It's the lowest it's been since June 2023. Some in the city believe that these figures mean that the bank is likely to slow the pace of future rate cuts. Speaking earlier this week, the Governor, Andrew Bailey, warned that the UK was facing a weak growth environment and the world was facing heightened uncertainty. So it's clear the bank is going to have to take into account a range of factors and has a very difficult decision when they meet next month.